Have you ever walked into a place and felt invisible? Not in some deep philosophical way, but the kind where you're standing right there, breathing, yet no one even notices. Well, that's exactly what it feels like today. His name is Jerome Carter, 67 years old, the powerful CEO of Carter Grand Hotels. Successful, famous, wealthy. But right now, no one cares to even glance his way. Ironically, this isn't just any hotel. This is the crown jewel of the luxury hotel empire he built, a place where one night's stay costs more than many people's entire monthly salary. Yet here stands Jerome, in the lobby of his own hotel, waiting hopelessly, no different from a wandering soul who accidentally stumbled in. But Jerome isn't here for a getaway. Recently, he's been receiving numerous complaints about customers being mistreated and unfairly treated at this very hotel. Jerome could sit in his office and handle things the easy way, but he knows that issues like this need to be confronted head-on, dealt with right there and then. Today, Jerome Carter is here to do just that. Simple, decisive, and uncompromising. He didn't step out of his usual limousine, nor did he wear his usual expensive suit. Instead, Jerome chose a simple old jacket, faded jeans, and a baseball cap that shielded his eyes. He deliberately hid his powerful identity to carry out a surprise visit, quietly inspecting the service quality at his hotel. As he stepped through the main doors, Jerome paused for a moment, glancing around at the magnificent lobby. It had always filled him with pride. Each tile, each chandelier hand-picked by him, all aimed at providing customers with an unforgettable experience. But today, everything seemed colder, more distant than usual. Jerome slowly walked toward the front desk, his gaze fixed on the young receptionist sitting behind the counter. That was Kimberly Evans, simply known as Kim, a petite blonde with a sharp face. Yet right now she was coldly absorbed in the screen of her phone. Jerome stood still in front of the counter for a moment, patiently waiting, hoping she would notice the customer standing right in front of her. However, time seemed to freeze around him as he became a mere blur, invisible in the eyes of the young receptionist. He cleared his throat softly, trying to make a subtle sound to snap her out of her indifferent state. But Kim remained motionless, her slender fingers swiping across the screen, her lips curling slightly as if she were engrossed in something far more interesting than her work. Jerome frowned, his deep gaze showing clear discontent. A powerful CEO, used to being warmly welcomed wherever he went, now felt like an anonymous guest, unworthy of even a glance. Jerome raised his hand and gently tapped the cool marble surface of the desk, struggling to contain his growing irritation. Once again, his sound was swallowed by the vastness of the lobby, as if he didn't exist, as if he had no value. In that moment, a sense of unfamiliarity and disappointment flooded Jerome's mind. He suddenly realized that this wasn't just a lack of professionalism. It was a sign of something far more serious. The recent complaints about the hotel's staff attitude were becoming more and more clear. Standing there, in his very own hotel, Jerome Carter, the powerful man with a legendary career, suddenly felt small, invisible, in a place he once ruled with pride. He told himself this was just the beginning of his surprise inspection, and soon the deep-seated secrets about the attitude and work culture at this hotel would be exposed. For Jerome Carter had never allowed anyone to tarnish the reputation he had spent a lifetime building, and today would be the day he ventured into the unknown dark corners of the very empire he held. The moment stretched on endlessly, and finally Jerome had no choice but to speak up once again, his voice soft but clear. "Excuse me, can you help me?" This time, the young woman behind the front desk, Kimberly Evans, reluctantly tore her gaze away from her phone screen and slowly looked up. Kim's eyes quickly scanned Jerome, from his worn shoes up to his simple jacket, and then lingered for a long time on his weathered face, dark skin, and hair streaked with gray. Her lips curled slightly, not into a smile, but into a gesture of boredom and barely concealed disdain. "Yes?" Kim replied in a flat, cold tone, completely lacking the warmth and enthusiasm Jerome had always expected from his staff. Just one short word, but it carried a reluctance, as if Jerome were disturbing her precious moment of relaxation. Jerome tried to suppress the disappointment rising inside him, maintaining his calm as he spoke slowly. "I made a reservation. The name's Jerome Carter." Kim sighed lightly and glanced quickly at the computer screen in front of her. Her red-painted nails tapped slowly on the keyboard, but her eyes were unfocused. Jerome could easily tell that she was going through the motions, not truly concerned with her task. A moment later, she looked back at him with a detached expression, her eyes clearly filled with skepticism and a hint of mockery. "I don't see your name in the system," Kim coldly announced, her eyes quickly darting back to the phone beside her, which was buzzing. Jerome immediately sensed something was off. He clearly remembered booking the room directly, even receiving a confirmation email. There could be no mistake here, especially not in his own hotel. "Are you sure? Please check again for me," Jerome politely suggested, his voice still composed, although frustration was beginning to simmer inside. Kim furrowed her brow slightly and sighed louder, not bothering to hide her irritation. "I told you, I don't see it. Maybe you've got the wrong hotel." The words came out casually but provocatively, as if Jerome were a confused old man who had accidentally wandered into a place that wasn't meant for him. Jerome narrowed his eyes, feeling a tightness in his chest, a wave of frustration and disappointment washing over him. He had lived long enough to recognize the subtle prejudice in her gaze and attitude, a kind of bias he thought he'd never face in his own establishment. However, Jerome wasn't ready to jump to conclusions. Just yet. He carefully took out his phone, opened the confirmation email, and gently handed it to Kim. "Here, you see? I have a clear confirmation email. Please take another careful look." Kim reluctantly glanced at the screen of his phone, but only for a moment before turning away. Her gaze was indifferent, and she didn't even try to hide the disdain in her voice. "Our system rarely makes mistakes, sir. If it's not showing up, maybe you made a mistake with the location or the date." Her cold, dismissive words made it clear to Jerome that this wasn't a simple mix-up, nor a system error. It was rooted in Kim's attitude, a contemptuous, cold, and unmistakably prejudiced stance towards him, an older man with humble attire, with no sign of the wealth and power that would justify his presence in such a luxurious place. Jerome stared deeply into Kim's eyes, but she quickly turned away, clearly avoiding him, her fingers swiftly scrolling across her phone screen, as if their conversation no longer mattered. The feeling of being dismissed and disregarded left a bitter taste in Jerome's mouth, but he didn't react just yet. As a seasoned man, he understood that there was more to uncover behind this attitude. He took a deep breath, trying to restrain the anger building up inside him, then gently continued, his voice carrying an unmistakable sense of calm and authority. "I think you should check again. I'm sure my room was reserved properly." Kim turned her head to look at him, her expression cold, clearly irritated, as if she were reluctantly granting a small favor to the man before her. Jerome stood silently, trying to contain the bitterness welling up inside. Standing in the hotel he had built with his own hands, he never imagined a day would come when he would have to endure such coldness and prejudice from his own staff. What puzzled Jerome most at that moment was why a young, polite, and charming girl like Kim could so easily dismiss and treat an elderly guest with such coldness, even cruelty. Jerome knew he would have to dig deeper into this issue. Today, his patience wasn't just for testing the service attitude, but also to uncover the darker corners behind the polished facade the hotel was trying to hide. And Kim, with her coldness and prejudice, had unknowingly opened a door for Jerome, leading him to the truth he needed to find, the true nature of the discrimination that had quietly existed within the very luxury hotel he owned. The bitter feeling still lingered in Jerome's chest, but he understood that losing his temper now wouldn't help him find the answers he was seeking. Instead, he decided to persist in the conversation, speaking gently but with firm resolve. "Perhaps you didn't hear me correctly. My name is Jerome Carter, and I made a reservation at this hotel. Please check again, more thoroughly." Kim looked up, her displeasure becoming more evident on her youthful face. Her cold, icy blue eyes scanned Jerome from head to toe once more, as though he were wasting her precious time. Slowly, she placed her phone down on the desk, the sound sharp and reluctant. "Mr. Carter," Kim emphasized with a tone full of sarcasm. "As I've already said, I checked and didn't see your name in the system. Perhaps you should try another hotel around here. Sometimes guests confuse locations without realizing it." That seemingly simple remark was actually quite sharp, clearly implying that Jerome, a man of advanced age, humble appearance, and black skin, couldn't possibly belong in such a luxurious place. Jerome could feel the deeper, insulting meaning behind Kim's every word. In that moment, he was more certain than ever that this wasn't a mere mistake, but a deliberate action. Jerome calmly studied the young woman in front of him, trying to read the person behind her beautiful yet arrogant exterior. Kim's cold stare didn't shy away. Rather, she looked directly at him with a subtle challenge. There was something in her attitude that made Jerome feel this kind of disdain wasn't a one-time occurrence, and it wasn't just this girl's isolated behavior. "Well, then, may I check the system with you? I'm sure it won't take much of your time," Jerome gently suggested, his tone polite, but clearly unyielding. Kim let out a soft chuckle, a fleeting smile that was enough for Jerome to recognize the contempt behind it. She glanced quickly toward a few customers nearby, almost as if emphasizing that he was embarrassing himself. Her fingers lazily tapped a few keys on the keyboard, muttering under her breath just loud enough for Jerome to hear. "I don't understand what you're trying to prove, Mr. Carter, but if you want, just wait." Kim reluctantly turned the computer screen toward Jerome, but so quickly that he barely had time to see anything before she spun the screen back. A small action, but Jerome understood the purpose. This young woman was trying to play mind games with him, making him question himself. At that moment, Jerome realized he wasn't just dealing with an unprofessional receptionist. He was facing someone deliberately creating unease in the customer to make them leave on their own. A subtle but malicious tactic he had heard of in closed-door hotel management meetings. He silently wondered if this was Kim's personal decision or part of something bigger, something far deeper. Jerome took a small step back, maintaining his usual calm demeanor, even though his mind was rapidly weighing his next moves. Kim likely didn't realize that her cold, rude behavior had inadvertently revealed a huge secret Jerome had been seeking: the existence of discriminatory attitudes within the very hotel he owned. He smiled slightly, trying to hide the tension in his chest, and spoke evenly, as though he hadn't noticed the hidden agenda. "I understand. Maybe I was mistaken. But I'll stay here for a few more minutes, if you don't mind, so I can verify my email once more." Kim shrugged indifferently, her face expressionless, no longer paying attention to him. Her gaze returned to her phone, and her slender fingers continued to swipe across it, completely ignoring Jerome's presence. Jerome stood there, pretending to focus on his phone, but in reality, he was quickly processing the events that had just occurred. A strong resolve rose within him. If there truly was a scheme unfolding at this hotel, today he would uncover it. Kim and people like her would soon realize that the psychological games they were playing with customers would lead to consequences far beyond what they imagined. And Jerome knew the real confrontation had only just begun. Jerome maintained his calm demeanor, but inside, deep waves of doubt and disappointment were beginning to rise. He glanced once more at his phone, carefully opening the reservation confirmation email. Despite knowing the situation, he wanted to try one last time, just to be sure he wasn't overlooking any other possibility. "Miss Evans," Jerome spoke, his voice calm yet resolute. "I'd like you to check the confirmation email one more time. I believe the system can't make such a severe mistake." Kim stopped scrolling through her phone, her face showing clear signs of frustration and impatience. She sighed heavily, her cold blue eyes briefly flicking over Jerome, before reluctantly looking at the phone he was holding out in front of her. But Kim's gaze lasted only a second before quickly turning away, as if she couldn't be bothered. "I see it," Kim said indifferently, her voice lacking any conviction or genuine concern. "But that doesn't change anything. If it's not in the system, then your email is meaningless. You've definitely made a mistake somewhere, or the booking system was faulty from the start." Kim's words were light, but the contempt they carried, implying that Jerome, a senior, simple man, couldn't even manage a simple task like booking a room online, was clear and unmistakable. Jerome felt the weight in his chest. It was no longer a technical issue. This had become a tense battle of wits between him and the young woman who was deliberately trying to diminish him in front of others. "I've booked rooms here dozens of times," Jerome said slowly, his eyes stern for the first time, showing a hint of the authority he carried as a powerful man. "I don't think this system would make such a mistake, especially with long-standing customers." Kim raised a delicate eyebrow, looking at him with a mix of surprise and mockery. She tilted her head toward him, a faint, mocking smile flickering on her lips, and her eyes locked on his with an unmistakable challenge. "Regular customer. Sorry, Mr. Carter, but I've worked here for a while, and I've never heard your name before." The coldness, laced with sarcasm in Kim's every word, felt like a sharp needle, deliberately poking at Jerome's pride. This was clearly an open challenge, an intentional attempt to put him in a position where he'd doubt himself. Jerome stared at the young, confident, and somewhat arrogant face before him, wondering what made Kim so sure she could so openly challenge a customer like him with such persistence. He took a deep breath, keeping the rising anger in check, and then slowly smiled, his tone gentle. "Miss Evans, I appreciate your confidence, but I think you should check a little more carefully. I'm sure I wouldn't make such a simple mistake." This time, Jerome watched Kim's reaction carefully, and he clearly saw a brief hesitation in her cold eyes. She quickly regained her composure, feigning a deep sigh of annoyance, before returning to her disinterested routine, pretending to search through the computer screen. Her fingers, adorned with red nail polish, still tapped lazily and indifferently, without a trace of enthusiasm or concern. "I've done my best to help you, Mr. Carter," Kim shrugged, a fake air of helplessness in her gesture, her eyes still fixed on the computer screen. "But there's no name in the system. Sorry, there's nothing more I can do." In that moment, Jerome understood everything. This wasn't a simple mistake. Behind Kim's attitude was certainly a deeper motive, a deliberate attempt to make things difficult, to look down on customers like him, an older man with a humble appearance. What surprised him even more was the audacity of this young woman. There must have been something that made Kim believe she could treat him this way without fear of consequences. Jerome realized that this mental battle wasn't just a small incident. It had become an underground struggle between an anonymous customer and a receptionist who was deliberately trying to assert her power and superiority. And he was determined not to back down. He wouldn't let Kim outsmart him or push him out of his own hotel with simple dismissals like this. "Thank you for your help," Jerome said, his voice now colder and more decisive. "But I believe I'll have to take care of this myself." He turned away from the front desk, but in his mind he knew this mental showdown was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Kim would soon realize that she had challenged someone who would not easily give up, especially when that person was Jerome Carter, the true owner of the place where she worked, and someone who would not tolerate any form of discrimination in the hotel empire he had painstakingly built. As Jerome turned his back on the front desk, he walked slowly toward the hotel lobby, striving to maintain his composed exterior as if nothing had just transpired. But inside, a cascade of questions and doubts began to rise, tangled and chaotic like a web. Jerome no longer had any doubts. Kim must have had a specific reason for her bold and confident denial of his existence in the hotel system. He found a secluded corner near the luxurious sofa set in the lobby, quietly sat down, and discreetly took out the internal phone from his coat pocket, a tool he always carried when conducting surprise checks. It was a compact yet powerful device, capable of accessing the entire reservation management system of the Carter Grand Hotels chain. Jerome seldom used this tool, as he had absolute trust in the staff and leadership under him. But today he had no choice but to use it, and this fact filled him with a sense of bitterness and disappointment. Jerome quickly entered the familiar security code, and the phone's screen lit up, displaying the detailed hotel system information. With a few simple but deliberate actions, he accessed today's reservation section, searching for the name Jerome Carter, his own name. The result that appeared immediately left Jerome stunned. His name had indeed appeared in the system, along with all his personal information, reservation code, and the assigned room number. But what truly shocked him was the status displayed clearly below his name. Reservation manually deleted. Jerome felt a chill run down his spine. He quickly expanded the details to check who was responsible for carrying out this serious action. And, as he suspected, the name of the person who had made the change was displayed clearly right beneath the status of the deleted reservation. Deleted by Kimberly Evans, front desk. In that moment, Jerome's whole body seemed to freeze. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, trying to steady his breath, struggling to suppress the boiling anger inside him. There was no longer any doubt. Kim had intentionally deleted his reservation. It wasn't a technical error, nor a misunderstanding. This was a clear act of discrimination, deliberately targeting him, an older black man with a simple appearance. Jerome quietly looked up, his eyes drifting toward the front desk, where Kim was still sitting, nonchalantly scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. Now, more than ever, Jerome realized the confidence and cold arrogance Kim displayed weren't accidental. She likely thought no one would ever discover her covert actions, or perhaps she was confident she had some kind of protection in the hotel. He wondered, was this just Kim's isolated action, or was she representing a bigger issue, a toxic culture he had never noticed before? A feeling of unease and worry began to form in Jerome's mind. If this was true, his hotel, Carter Grand Hotels, was facing a serious moral crisis that he could not ignore or delay any longer. Jerome took a deep breath, reminding himself to remain calm and wise. He knew that now was not the time to lose his temper or act impulsively. He needed to stay composed, gather all the evidence, and handle this situation tactfully, not only to stop this ugly behavior, but also to uncover the full truth behind it. Sitting there, he slowly took a screenshot of the phone, capturing the clearest and most detailed evidence of Kim's severe misconduct. Then, he placed the internal phone back into his coat pocket, stood up slowly, adjusted his coat, and cast a thoughtful gaze back toward the front desk. Kim, at that moment, seemed to sense his stare. She looked up briefly, throwing him a glance that held a hint of challenge before quickly turning away. Jerome smiled gently, with hidden meaning. He knew Kim's game now, and from this moment forward, he would be the one leading the game, no longer the victim being manipulated. Jerome decided that today would mark the day he would officially step into the underground battle to expose all the dark secrets that had been hidden too long beneath the glamorous facade of the hotel. And he was certain of one thing: Kim and those like her would soon face the consequences for the discriminatory and offensive actions they had committed. With his personal phone in hand, Jerome calmly walked forward, his mind now clear with a well-defined plan. From this moment on, nothing would stop him in his pursuit of truth and the protection of what was right. Jerome kept his gaze calm as he steadily walked toward the front desk, every step deliberate yet resolute. The moment he returned, Kim was momentarily taken aback, but quickly regained her cold, indifferent expression, her arrogant confidence still visible in her sharp blue eyes. "Mr. Carter, is there anything else you'd like to ask?" Kim asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm, mixed with a hint of annoyance as she saw Jerome had yet to leave. This time, Jerome didn't respond immediately. He stared directly into Kim's eyes, silent for a few seconds, the tension between them building, as if the vast hotel space had suddenly shrunk, leaving only him and the young woman facing each other in a silent battle. Finally, Jerome spoke slowly but with authority. "Miss Evans, before I leave, I have one question for you." Kim furrowed her brow slightly and gave a small smirk, her expression briefly filled with disdain and discomfort, but her voice remained flat. "Go ahead, Mr. Carter." Jerome slowly took the internal phone from his coat pocket and held it out in front of Kim. His voice was deep and clear, calm but deliberate, each word striking like a sharp knife, cutting through the false, nonchalant mask the young woman had been trying to maintain. "Why did you delete my reservation?" In an instant, Kim's expression shifted completely. The arrogant confidence she had just displayed evaporated, her eyes widening in confusion and panic. Her gaze trembled as she stared at the phone Jerome was holding, where the confirmation of her actions was clearly displayed. "Reservation manually deleted by Kimberly Evans." I don't know what you're talking about," Kim stammered weakly, her voice trembling, no longer cold or indifferent. "Don't act like you don't know what happened," Jerome quickly replied, his voice stern and resolute. "Miss Evans, you personally deleted my reservation from the hotel system. I have clear evidence here. Are you still going to deny it?" Kim quickly scanned the front desk, perhaps hoping for some help, but there was no one around who could intervene in this unexpected confrontation. For the first time, the young woman realized the real fear of facing a guest she had thought was harmless. Her perfectly manicured red nails began to shake, and she hurriedly turned back toward Jerome, her voice trying to remain calm but utterly helpless. "I think there's been some kind of mistake. Maybe it's the system, I can't—" "Miss Evans," Jerome cut her off, his gaze so firm and sharp that Kim immediately fell silent, unable to continue lying. "Stop lying. We both know the system didn't make any errors. You did this deliberately. I just want to know why." Under the pressure of Jerome's cold stare, Kim completely lost control. Her face flushed red, her lips quivering, unable to say another word. From a receptionist who always acted confident and arrogant, she now became small, weak, and completely powerless before the elderly man she had so underestimated from the start. I really don't know what's going on." Kim tried one last time, but her voice was hollow, with no trace of persuasion left. Jerome looked at Kim intently, his anger now fully visible. He leaned in slightly, his voice low but clear with every word. "I think you know exactly what you're doing, Miss Evans. Your actions are not only unprofessional, but they are also a serious offense, a case of discrimination against a customer. I don't know how many others you've done this to, but I promise you, this will be the last time you do this at this hotel." Kim couldn't answer any more. She lowered her head, trying to avoid Jerome's stern gaze, the first time in her life she felt completely out of control. All the coldness and arrogance had melted away, leaving only a feeling of panic and despair. Kim realized too late that she had just made a terrible mistake, and the man she thought she could easily deal with now had all the evidence to destroy her career. Jerome took a step back, standing tall, his gaze never leaving Kim for another second. He had achieved his goal in this face-to-face confrontation. Kim was now fully subdued. But Jerome knew this story wasn't over yet. He gently placed the phone back into his coat pocket, his voice low and calm but filled with strength and authority. "I hope you understand the seriousness of this matter, because I'm sure this isn't the first time you've done this. And I promise, Miss Evans, I will make sure everything is brought to light." Jerome turned and walked away, leaving Kim trembling and completely defeated behind him. He knew well that the real battle still lay ahead, but at least today he had made Kim and others like her understand that they had made the biggest mistake of their lives by underestimating the harmless-looking elderly man in front of them. Just as Jerome turned to leave, Kim's weak, reluctant voice suddenly echoed behind him. "Wait, Mr. Carter, I found a room for you." Jerome slowly turned back, his gaze calm but clearly scrutinizing, intently watching Kim's face, which was slowly paling with anxiety. The young woman no longer carried her arrogant, confident demeanor. Instead, a forced, reluctant smile appeared, as if she had just decided on something she didn't want to do. "What room?" Jerome asked tersely, his tone polite but still cold and authoritative. Kim lowered her gaze to the desk, her hands trembling as she pulled out the room key, extending it toward Jerome without daring to meet his eyes. Her voice was barely audible as she answered, "Room 1427 on the 14th floor." As soon as Jerome heard the room number, his brow furrowed. As someone who had been deeply involved in designing every detail of Carter Grand Hotels, he knew exactly what room 1427 was like. It was the smallest, worst-positioned room in the entire hotel, situated right next to the noisy elevator and with a window that overlooked the hotel's garbage area. It was a room reserved for emergencies, never given to regular guests, especially not to someone who had made a reservation in advance like Jerome. He immediately realized this wasn't an accidental mistake. It was a deliberate act of retaliation by Kim after he had exposed her earlier. "Room 1427, Jerome repeated clearly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. His voice remained calm, but there was a sharpness to it now, drawing the attention of several customers in the lobby. Kim hurriedly nodded, still too afraid to look directly at Jerome, her voice small and weak. "Yes, it's the only one left." Jerome stood still for a moment, staring at the young woman before him, letting the silence drag on, intentionally increasing the pressure on Kim. After a few seconds, he spoke again, his voice clear and forceful, causing everyone in the lobby to turn toward him. "Miss Evans, I think you know very well what room 1427 is like. I want you to explain right now. Why did you deliberately assign me a room next to the elevator facing the garbage area?" Jerome's words rang out, sharp and authoritative, as if striking at a concealed secret. All the guests in the lobby immediately turned their attention to the front desk, where Kim stood frozen in place. Her face had drained of color, and she couldn't hide the panic and confusion in her eyes. I didn't mean to," Kim stammered, her voice trembling, no longer holding the cold, indifferent tone it had before. "Didn't mean to?" Jerome emphasized every word, his gaze unyielding and forceful, making Kim fall silent, unable to continue lying. "Ms. Evans, you deleted my reservation earlier, and now that I've caught you, you retaliate by assigning me the worst room in the hotel. That's not an accident, it's a deliberate, offensive act." The surrounding guests began murmuring in disapproval, many of them staring at Kim, which only made her more frantic. For the first time in her life, the young woman, who had always prided herself on her elegant, cold exterior, was now experiencing the ultimate embarrassment in front of dozens of customers who had witnessed the entire exchange. "Mister, I truly apologize, but that was the only room left." Kim desperately tried to justify herself once more, but her words became increasingly unconvincing. Jerome shook his head slightly, his eyes now gleaming with determination, rejecting any further lies. "Ms. Evans, I can't believe a receptionist would behave so unprofessionally, discriminate, and blatantly insult a customer like this in my hotel. This is no longer a personal issue between you and me. This is an offense against all the guests of Carter Grand Hotels." Kim was now completely unable to control the situation. She lowered her head, unable to look up any longer, her hands gripping the edge of the desk tightly, her whole body trembling, feeling as though her career was collapsing before her eyes. Jerome turned to address the customers around him, his voice loud and authoritative, yet sincere and clear. "I apologize that you all had to witness this, but I believe it is necessary for everyone to understand what's happening here at this hotel. I assure you that I will thoroughly investigate and address this issue, so no one else has to endure the kind of discrimination I face today." As Jerome finished speaking, a light round of applause erupted from the crowd of customers, showing their support for him. Kim stood motionless, fully aware that she had lost, with no way out. Jerome gave her one last cold glance before turning toward the elevator. But this time, he wasn't just leaving. Inside, he was filled with a strong determination to root out people like Kim, who were quietly undermining the precious values he had spent his life building at Carter Grand Hotels. The moment the elevator doors closed, Jerome immediately felt the weight of an invisible pressure bearing down on his shoulders. As he stepped into room 1427, Jerome frowned as he glanced out the narrow window, exactly as he had anticipated. A bleak and dreary view of the hotel's trash area, completely opposite to the luxurious standards that were the pride of the Carter Grand Hotels chain. He slowly sat down, the anger he had felt earlier now transforming into deep concern. Jerome understood that Kim's actions weren't just a personal act of retaliation. There was likely something deeper at play, a more serious issue tied to the entire management system of the hotel. Without hesitation, Jerome opened his laptop and quickly accessed the hotel's internal management system. He needed to understand the severity of what he had just witnessed, and whether this was an isolated incident or one of many discriminatory acts that had been hidden for so long. Reports and customer complaints began to appear on the screen, and the further he dug into the documents, the more stunned and shocked he became. Dozens of reports piled up, stretching back several months, even from last year, all with eerily similar content. Discriminatory attitude from receptionist Kimberly Evans. Jerome read each complaint slowly, his heart sinking with each line. Most of the complaints were from black customers, elderly individuals, or those who appeared to have humble appearances. They spoke of being treated coldly, being refused service, or being given the worst rooms in the hotel, exactly like the experience he had just endured. What shocked Jerome the most was that no corrective actions had been taken by the hotel management for these serious complaints. All the reports were marked as received, but there was no indication of any follow-up or actions to resolve them. It was a chilling silence, a blatant cover-up that was almost unbelievable. He continued to dig deeper into the internal reports. Slowly, the identity of the person behind this serious issue began to unfold. Stephen Harris, 53, the white manager responsible for the hotel, a man who had worked there for many years with an average management record, unremarkable, but never questioned about his abilities. Jerome opened Stephen Harris's performance reviews and immediately saw why this terrible situation had persisted silently for so long. Stephen Harris was notorious within the company for shirking responsibility, always postponing or ignoring complex issues that he believed might cause inconvenience to himself. Stephen preferred silence and would downplay serious complaints as long as they didn't disrupt his comfortable job. It was Stephen's passive and evasive attitude that had allowed Kim to act with impunity for so long. Jerome felt his anger flare up stronger than ever. Stephen wasn't just an ineffective manager. He had directly enabled disgraceful acts of discrimination to occur beneath the glamorous facade of this prestigious hotel. Jerome closed the laptop, taking a deep breath to calm himself. He knew well that this was no longer a small issue that could be solved with a few reprimands. This was a severe ethical crisis that required decisive, thorough, and uncompromising action. He stepped to the window, gazing out at the darkened evening scene. Only the dim streetlights illuminated the trash area below. He wondered how many innocent customers had stood in this very spot, deeply hurt by the cruel discrimination and prejudice they faced. And he, as the owner of the hotel chain, had allowed this to happen in the place he had built with his life's work. But Jerome quickly pushed aside those self-recriminating thoughts. What mattered now was that he needed to act. Stephen Harris and employees like Kim would be held accountable for the harm they had caused to customers, and Jerome was determined that no one else would ever experience the pain and humiliation he had just endured. He straightened up, his gaze now firm and resolute, filled with a profound sense of purpose. A clear plan formed in his mind. Tomorrow, he would confront Stephen Harris directly, and this time, Jerome would accept no excuses or justifications. Stephen Harris and the staff who had taken advantage of silence to harm customers would face the consequences they deserved. Jerome knew this battle would be difficult, but he also believed that justice always stood with the truth, and he would be the one to make it happen, not just for himself, but for all the nameless customers who had been ignored and mistreated for so long. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the clear glass of the hotel, Jerome stood before Stephen Harris's office door. He paused for a moment, took a deep breath to steady his mind, and then knocked decisively. "I'm busy. Who is it?" A disgruntled voice came from inside, just as expected from Stephen's lazy and evasive nature. Without waiting any longer, Jerome pushed the door open and walked in, facing Stephen, who was lounging in his large leather chair behind the desk. Stephen's expression quickly shifted from annoyance to surprise, then to flustered confusion as he realized the person who had just entered was none other than Jerome Carter. "Ah, Mr. Carter." Stephen jumped to his feet, his eyes wide with panic as he stammered, I didn't know you were coming today." "Clearly you didn't," Jerome replied coldly, shutting the door with a firm click before walking straight to the desk, his sharp, stern gaze fixed on Stephen. "Because if you did, I would never have had to experience such a horrible day in my own hotel yesterday." Stephen gulped, his pudgy hand trembling as he awkwardly adjusted his crooked tie, trying to find some excuse. "Mr. Carter, I'm sure this is just a small misunderstanding. I always try my best to manage everything here well." "A small misunderstanding?" Jerome interrupted Stephen, his calm tone turning so chilling that Stephen immediately fell silent. "You call the fact that dozens of customers have been discriminated against by your employee, Kimberly Evans, a small misunderstanding? Do you have any idea how many complaints are sitting in your system?" Stephen lowered his head, his eyes darting around the desk as though searching for some invisible rescue, his voice shaking with panic. I know, I've received them and I'm dealing with them gradually. But sometimes things can't be resolved quickly like—" "Don't try to justify it any longer," Jerome cut in harshly, slamming a stack of printed complaints onto the desk. The noise made Stephen jump back, stepping away as if he were cornered. Jerome continued, his voice sharp and full of authority. "All these files clearly show that Receptionist Kimberly Evans has repeatedly acted with discrimination. These customers were hurt, they were insulted, and the most shocking thing is, what did you do about it? Nothing. You just sat there, silent, hoping it would all go away, didn't you, Stephen?" Stephen trembled as he looked at the stack of files in front of him. His face flushed with embarrassment as he weakly tried to speak. "Mr. Carter, I really apologize, but I didn't think the issue was that serious." "You didn't think, or you didn't dare to think." Jerome emphasized each word, his cold gaze pinning Stephen in place. "It's your irresponsibility and lack of courage that allowed these blatantly racist actions to continue under your watch. I've seen it with my own eyes, I've experienced it myself. How much longer are you going to deny it?" Stephen was now completely dazed, wiping the sweat that had begun to bead on his temples, his voice trembling as he pleaded, "Please, give me a chance to fix this. I promise I'll handle it thoroughly. I'll speak to Kim directly." "It's too late, Stephen." Jerome cut him off decisively, his voice not just angry, but filled with deep disappointment. "You've had dozens of chances, but you've wasted them all. You can't keep hiding behind empty promises. This isn't just a problem with Kim, this is your problem. An incompetent, irresponsible manager." Stephen stood frozen, his eyes wide with fear and despair as he looked at Jerome, fully aware that no explanation could change the situation now. Jerome stepped closer, his voice lowering but filled with powerful resolve. "I want you to understand one thing, Stephen. Carter Grand Hotels will never tolerate discrimination, and we will not accept cowardly, irresponsible managers like you. And I will make sure this is dealt with thoroughly, not by you, but by me." Stephen slumped into his chair, his hands clutching his head in panic. Jerome gave him one last cold look before turning and walking out of the office, slamming the door shut behind him. He paused for a moment in the hallway, taking a deep breath to shake off the feeling of disappointment and bitterness in his chest. Jerome didn't enjoy confronting his subordinates like this, but he knew it was necessary. To protect the honor and core values of Carter Grand Hotels, he couldn't afford to be soft or compromise anymore. And he knew today's confrontation was just the first step in the difficult journey ahead. But at least now, Jerome was ready. He believed in the power of justice, in the value of truth, and most importantly, he would never allow anyone to harm what he had spent his life building. As soon as Jerome stepped out of Stephen's office, he paused for a moment in the hallway, telling himself that now was not the time for hesitation or weakness. He took a deep breath to calm himself, then turned and looked back at Stephen, who was still stunned in his office, through the slightly open door. "Stephen, I want you to fire Kimberly Evans immediately, right in the hotel lobby. This is not a suggestion, it's an order." Stephen jumped in shock, his face going pale as he stumbled to his feet. "Mr. Carter, right now, in the lobby," Jerome replied coldly, each word clear and decisive, cutting through Stephen's feeble attempts at reasoning. "Yes. She has offended so many people right in the lobby, so she should be dismissed right from there." Without giving Stephen any chance to negotiate or delay, Jerome walked straight toward the lobby, where Kim was still standing behind the front desk, trying to appear normal but unable to hide her tension. As Jerome approached, she glanced quickly at him, her eyes filled with worry and wariness. Stephen followed behind Jerome, the middle-aged man who had always avoided conflict, now red-faced, beads of sweat soaking his temples. He stepped up to Kim, trying to speak clearly, but his voice still shook with nerves. "Kimberly, I'm very sorry, but you're being fired. This decision is effective immediately." All the customers and staff in the lobby immediately turned their attention to the front desk. In that moment, it felt as though time stood still. Kim froze, her eyes wide with panic and fury. "What did you say? You're firing me? Right here?" Stephen struggled to maintain his composure, but his voice trembled. "Yes, I'm sorry, but this is final." Kim immediately lost all of her usual proud, elegant demeanor. Her face flushed with anger, her eyes widening with fury. She shouted loudly, completely losing her politeness. "On what authority do you do this to me? I've worked here for so long. You can't treat me like this." The guests around them started to murmur, their astonishment and curiosity mixing with a strange sense of amusement as they witnessed this unprecedented scene. Jerome stood a few steps away, coldly observing the entire unfolding drama. He said nothing, but his stern gaze showed no mercy. Stephen tried to explain in a soft voice, but the more he spoke, the more his unease and helplessness became apparent. "Ms. Evans, this isn't my decision. It's Mr. Carter's decision. Your behavior with customers has been unacceptable." Kim suddenly whipped her head toward Jerome, her eyes full of hatred and blame, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks from both embarrassment and anger. "It's all your fault. You've ruined me. Who do you think you are, doing this to me?" Jerome looked at Kim, completely unfazed by her insults. He spoke decisively, each word cold and clear. "I am the one ensuring that people like you will never be allowed to treat customers poorly again. Today, you are simply receiving what you have inflicted on others." Kim broke down in loud sobs, screaming in anger, causing the entire lobby to erupt into chaos for a few minutes. "You'll pay for this. I'm suing you. I won't let this go." Jerome only looked at her with a cold, indifferent gaze, unmoved by her empty threats. He knew Kim was flailing in desperation, seeking some sympathy, but it was all in vain. Stephen signaled for security to step forward and escort Kim out of the lobby. She struggled, crying, shouting, but ultimately had no choice but to be led away in utter humiliation, in front of dozens of customers and coworkers. Jerome stood still, silently witnessing the scene. There was no pleasure in it, no sense of triumph, only a feeling of relief that justice had finally been served. He knew that today's decision wasn't just punishment for Kim. It was a powerful warning to anyone in the hotel who might be considering mistreating customers. As Kim was escorted out the door, the murmurs around the room began to subside. Jerome turned to face the remaining staff and customers in the lobby, his voice ringing out clearly and firmly, breaking the tense atmosphere. "I'm sorry that you all had to witness this, but today, we've done the right thing. Carter Grand Hotels will never tolerate any form of discrimination, no matter how small." As Jerome finished speaking, a few claps started from the crowd, quickly spreading throughout the lobby. Jerome gave a small nod in acknowledgement of the support, a sense of relief mixed with pride swelling within him. However, Jerome knew that this was just the first step in cleaning up his hotel system. But at least today he had made it clear to everyone that at Carter Grand Hotels, justice wasn't just a promise. It was a core value that could not be violated. As the last of the applause faded, Jerome silently moved to the center of the hotel lobby, his gaze calm yet commanding, drawing the attention of both customers and staff. He paused for a moment, scanning the room to ensure everyone was looking at him, then slowly spoke. "I would like to take this opportunity to officially introduce myself to everyone. I am Jerome Carter, the chairman and CEO of the Carter Grand Hotels chain." The entire lobby immediately fell into stunned silence. The staff and customers widened their eyes, many unable to hide their shock. They began to realize that the elderly man with a humble, unassuming appearance, whom they had just witnessed being discriminated against, was actually the most powerful figure in this prestigious hotel empire. Jerome continued, his tone serious, but tinged with deep sorrow. "I deeply regret being here today under these circumstances. I never imagined that within my own hotel, built with my life's work, there would exist such disgraceful acts of racism." He directed his gaze squarely at the staff, especially at Stephen Harris, who now seemed utterly drained, trembling against the wall to keep from collapsing. "From this moment on," Jerome declared clearly, his voice firm as an unassailable command, "this hotel will be closed for a full audit. All business operations will cease immediately, and I will personally oversee this investigation." Jerome's unexpected announcement immediately caused a wave of panic among the staff. They began looking at each other with anxiety, whispering in hushed voices. Many staff members immediately realized that this was not just about one employee being fired. It could very well be the start of a sweeping purge of the entire management and staff system. A young female employee bravely stepped forward, nervously asking Jerome, "Mr. Carter, what should we do about our customers?" Jerome looked at the young woman, his gaze still stern but softening slightly. He answered clearly and decisively, "All current guests will be transferred to other hotels within the Carter Grand Hotel system today. Any additional costs will be covered by the company. This is our fault, and we must ensure no further guests are inconvenienced." The customers nearby who heard this let out a collective sigh of relief. However, the staff understood that this was Jerome's direct message to them. There would be no more tolerance for injustice. Jerome continued to look directly at Stephen Harris, who was trying to avoid his gaze, his voice cold but clear. "Stephen, I want you to understand that this audit is not just about a few complaints. It will review every department, every process, every decision you have approved throughout your tenure here." Stephen lowered his head, silent with despair. He knew that the coming days would be the most difficult and humiliating of his life, as all his mistakes and irresponsibility would be fully exposed. Jerome turned to the staff, his voice now softer but full of seriousness. "I know that not all of you participated in such shameful behavior, but everyone must understand that silence and complicity are also what allowed these serious offenses to continue for so long. I expect all of you to fully cooperate with this investigation, so we can quickly restore this hotel to the core values that I have worked so hard to build." The staff nodded silently, the tension and fear filling the vast space of the lobby. They all understood that Jerome wasn't just issuing a warning. This was a drastic change that would shake the entire management and staff system. Jerome took one last look around the hotel lobby, his eyes tired but filled with determination and hope. He knew that this was a difficult but necessary decision, not just to protect the reputation of the Carter Grand Hotel's chain, but also as a strong affirmation of the ethical principles and core values he had always followed. Before he walked away, Jerome spoke softly, but each word resonated with strength and conviction in the complete silence of the lobby. I want everyone to remember today. This is the day we chose to stand for the truth, to face our mistakes, and to start over. Because Carter Grand Hotels will never tolerate injustice and discrimination. With those final words, Jerome turned and walked away, leaving behind a mixture of respect, admiration, and fear from everyone remaining. They understood that, after today, Carter Grand Hotels would never be the same again. But at the same time, this was their only chance to build a completely new future with Jerome, one that was worthy of the true values he had spent his entire life protecting. As soon as Jerome turned to leave, Stephen Harris immediately ran after him, his voice trembling and full of desperation. "Mr. Carter, please give me another chance. I swear I will fix my mistakes. Please give me time to make everything right." Jerome stopped walking, but did not turn around immediately. He stood still for a few seconds, letting Stephen's desperate plea dissolve into the cold silence of the hotel corridor. Finally, he gently turned around and looked directly into Stephen's panicked, pleading eyes, his voice cold and more decisive than ever. "Stephen, you've had dozens of chances to do the right thing, but you chose silence and evasion of responsibility. At this point, you no longer have the right to ask for any more chances." Stephen froze, his face pale, his hands dropping in despair. But Jerome didn't give him a chance to react further, immediately turning to the two assistants who had stepped closer, giving them a clear directive. "I want you to immediately conduct a thorough review of all staff members. Anyone who has engaged in discriminatory behavior or who has covered up misconduct must be suspended immediately." The two assistants nodded in acknowledgement and quickly walked away without hesitation. Other staff members who had witnessed the scene from a distance were now panicking, understanding that this was not just a routine check, it was a comprehensive, ruthless purge of the entire management system and staff. Stephen, still unable to accept the reality, tried to take another step toward Jerome, his voice now pleading more than ever. "Please, Jerome, think of the years I've served here. I've never made such a serious mistake before. Please give me one more chance." Jerome immediately interrupted him with a stern, unyielding glance. "Stephen, you have sealed your own fate. A hotel manager who doesn't care when customers are insulted right in front of him. How can you ask for another opportunity? Not only have you been irresponsible, but you've also betrayed all the core values of this hotel chain." Stephen lowered his head, too ashamed to face Jerome any longer. He realized that all his justifications were meaningless now, and all doors had been shut to him. Jerome turned back to face the staff gathered in the lobby, his voice ringing out clearly and powerfully, immediately drawing everyone's attention. "I will say this one last time. Anyone who still thinks they can disregard the principles and ethics of working at Carter Grand Hotels should leave right now. No exceptions, no negotiations. From today, any act of discrimination or mistreatment of customers, no matter how small, will be dealt with severely." The remaining staff stood silently, none daring to speak. They all understood how serious Jerome was. Some exchanged anxious glances, wondering if they had, at some point, been complicit or silent in the face of past wrongdoings. Jerome knew that this internal purge was not just about firing a few employees, it was a painful reality he had to face. He had to accept that these serious violations had been allowed to persist under his leadership for far too long, with no one daring to speak out or challenge them. He looked around one last time, his voice softening slightly but still resolute and firm. I know this will be a difficult and challenging time for all of us, but I believe that only by facing our past mistakes openly and courageously can we repair them and move forward with greater integrity and trust. His words seemed to awaken the conscience and self-respect of many staff members. They understood that from this moment on, everything would change completely. A few staff members stepped forward voluntarily, bowing their heads in a silent commitment and self-reflection before Jerome. Jerome nodded in acknowledgement, knowing that this was just the first step in a long and challenging journey. But today, he had made one thing clear. At Carter Grand Hotels, fairness and respect for customers were not just slogans. They were absolute values he would protect at all costs. Before leaving the lobby, Jerome paused in front of Stephen one last time, his voice low but unmistakably clear, without a hint of hesitation. Stephen, I want you to remember this well. You haven't just lost your position today, you've lost the trust and respect, things that are the most important for any leader. This is not just the end of your career here at this hotel, but a valuable lesson you'll carry with you for the rest of your life. Jerome turned and walked away without looking back. The remaining staff stood behind, their eyes filled with a mix of respect, fear, and determination. They understood that after today, Carter Grand Hotels would never be the same again. But they also knew that Jerome's bold decision had opened up a valuable opportunity to rebuild the trust, honor, and pride the hotel truly deserved. As soon as Jerome turned to walk away, Stephen Harris immediately ran after him, his voice trembling and full of desperation. Mr. Carter, please, just give me a moment. I beg you, let me explain. Jerome stopped, not turning immediately, but standing still for a few seconds, letting Stephen's desperate plea fade into the cold silence of the hotel corridor. Finally, he gently turned around, looking directly into Stephen's panicked, pleading eyes. His voice was cold and more decisive than ever. Stephen, you've had countless opportunities to do the right thing, but you chose silence and evasion of responsibility. At this point, you no longer have the right to ask for any more chances. Stephen froze, his face pale, his hands hanging limply in despair. But Jerome didn't give him a chance to react further, immediately turning to the two assistants who had stepped forward, giving them a clear directive. I want you to immediately conduct a thorough review of all staff members. Anyone who has engaged in discriminatory behavior or covered up misconduct must be suspended immediately. The two assistants nodded in acknowledgement and quickly walked away without hesitation. The other staff members who had witnessed the scene from afar now panicked, realizing this was no longer a routine check. It was a full-blown, ruthless purge of the entire management system and staff. Stephen, still unable to accept the reality, tried to take another step toward Jerome, his voice pleading more than ever. Please, Jerome, think of the years I've served here. I've never made such a serious mistake before. Please, give me one more chance. Jerome immediately interrupted him with a stern, unwavering glance. Stephen, you've destroyed everything you ever built. A manager who refuses to speak up when he sees injustice before him has already forfeited his right to stand in this position. Stephen stood still, motionless, as though the ground beneath him had collapsed. Jerome's words struck like a dagger, cutting off all the last remnants of hope Stephen had been clinging to. Jerome continued, his voice now lower, but carrying the strength of someone who would never reverse his decision. From this moment on, you are officially fired. I do not want to see you in this hotel again." Stephen opened his mouth, wanting to say something more, but no words came out. Despair and humiliation enveloped him like a cold fog. The staff members nearby looked at him with pity and disappointment, which only made his bitterness grow deeper. Stephen turned and walked away, completely broken. Each step he took seemed heavier, with all eyes now focused on the former respected manager who was now nothing more than a figure of failure and disgrace. He didn't dare lift his head, his gaze fixed on the polished floor beneath him, every step uncertain and faltering. Jerome stood still, silently witnessing the scene without showing any emotion. He wasn't being cruel, but he knew that Stephen had to face the consequences of the choices he had made. Jerome understood that forgiveness at this moment would not help the hotel. On the contrary, it would only harm the customers who had suffered for so long. Stephen stepped out of the hotel, standing alone in the dimming light of the late afternoon, with empty hands and his self-respect completely shattered. He stood there for a long time, gazing at the familiar Carter Grand Hotel's sign, and for the first time, he realized that he had lost the most valuable opportunity of his life, the chance to truly become a leader. The remaining staff inside the hotel understood that today's event was the strongest wake-up call for all of them. Some employees still felt shaken and fearful, but within them, a new sense of respect for Jerome Carter began to rise. They now understood that he was willing to do whatever it took to protect the most basic ethical values in his business. Jerome turned and walked back to the management office, feeling a little lighter. He knew this was a painful but necessary chapter coming to an end. The hotel would now begin a new chapter, one where there was no room for silence and complicity, for discrimination, or for inept and irresponsible managers like Stephen Harris. Now, the most important task ahead of Jerome was to rebuild trust, honor, and the quality of service at Carter Grand Hotels. And he believed that, no matter how big the challenges ahead, today marked a pivotal turning point for the hotel to regain the respect and pride it truly deserved. As the door to the management office closed behind him, Jerome slowly made his way to his private office. His soft footsteps echoed steadily in the quiet hallway, but now the sound felt like a peaceful melody after the storm. Each step brought a sense of relief, for he knew that the difficult decisions he had made were the foundation upon which Carter Grand Hotels would embark on a new chapter. Reaching his office, Jerome gently closed the door and walked over to the small bar, pouring himself a glass of red wine. He sat down in his familiar leather chair by the large window, savoring each sip. The evening light outside the window cast a gentle glow over the city below, and Jerome felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. He understood that today's actions weren't just about firing an incompetent manager or a discriminatory employee. This was a bold statement about ethical values, self-respect, and honor, the things he had always prioritized throughout his life. Jerome took pride in the fact that, no matter how painful the truth was, he had chosen the most courageous way to protect the values he deeply believed in. A few minutes later, Jerome placed his wine glass on the table, opened his laptop once more, but this time not to read the grim reports he had seen earlier. Instead, he was following through on the promise he had made to his customers. He quickly drafted an official letter addressed to every customer who had been hurt by the discrimination they had suffered at his hotel. In the letter, Jerome sincerely apologized for the unfortunate experiences they had endured, offering generous and thoughtful compensation, full reimbursement for their stay, complimentary access to premium services for a year, and a heartfelt invitation to experience the services again at any of the hotels within the Carter Grand Hotel system. Once the letter was sent, he leaned back in his chair, a small, satisfied smile on his face. Jerome wasn't doing this just to save the hotel's reputation. He was doing it because he genuinely wanted to reaffirm the principle he had always respected and protected since the very beginning of his career. Every customer deserves to be treated with the utmost respect. Jerome knew that these compensation letters wouldn't immediately heal all the wounds his customers had suffered, but he hoped it would be the strongest commitment, proving to every customer that Carter Grand Hotels would never turn its back on the most fundamental human values: kindness and respect for every individual, no matter who they were, where they came from, or how they appeared. As night slowly fell, Jerome stood up and walked over to the large window, his gaze distant yet filled with confidence and strength. The city below, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights, served as a reminder that even in the darkness, there are always glimmers of hope. And Jerome was the one who would bring those lights, leading Carter Grand Hotels into a brighter and more compassionate future. He whispered softly to himself, as if reminding both himself and everyone who worked there. Every customer who walks through the doors of this hotel must be treated like an honored guest. That is the eternal promise we must never forget. Jerome turned, taking one last look around his familiar office before leaving. Inside, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace, not just because he had courageously faced the truth, but because he had successfully protected the most precious values of his life. He knew that from today onward, nothing at Carter Grand Hotels would ever be the same. But he also understood that this bold and courageous change was the only path forward for the hotel, to build a future grounded in kindness and mutual respect. And Jerome Carter, the elderly man with white hair, smiled gently once more, his heart full of hope, as he walked out of the room to begin a completely new chapter. The chapter of kindness. The story of Jerome Carter had come to an end, but the lingering impact and powerful message of kindness, fairness, and respect would remain with us. Jerome taught us that no matter where we stand, the greatest power belongs to those who dare to stand up against injustice and defend their own moral values. What would you do if you were Jerome, discovering that an employee at your hotel had discriminated against a guest? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful and want to spread the powerful message of kindness and fairness, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next inspiring and meaningful stories. Thank you, and see you in the next video.